you clean up that bottom on those things, and all of a sudden the bass really shines and has its own room. Very often when I'm listening for the low end, I'll play it in here and then I go into the live room here at the studio and I listen from out there. And I called my manager and I said, hey, Ringo's making a record. I don't know if it's been mixed yet or not, but if it hasn't, I want to mix that record. Literally like 15 minutes later, he called back. He said, all right, you got a meeting with Mark Hudson on Tuesday. At this point, for me at least, I don't feel like there's much of a difference between, outside of workflow, sonically, I don't feel like there's much of a difference between working in the box and on a console. Kind of the secret to getting a good bass sound, I think, is more about...
This episode is brought to you by Baby Audio. Today we talk to Dave Way, a renowned producer-engineer who has worked with Michael Jackson, Pink, Ringo Starr, and Macy Gray. We discuss the low-ended mixes, his experience working with Michael Jackson, Ringo Starr, and much, much more. Hi, Dave. Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here with you, and thanks for having me.
I absolutely love the low end of your mixes. So I'd like to start by talking about that. What do you think are the most important factors to achieve that clean and powerful low end?
Oh, I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I just do it. The main thing, if I was going to think about what I kind of do consistently, is rolling off the low frequencies on a lot of stuff, things that don't need to compete with the bass. The instruments that really aren't playing down there, and what you get is just rumble and just noise, basically. That it's amazing that if you just put a high pass filter on up to whatever, 100 hertz, sometimes 200, sometimes, and things that, even guitars, acoustic guitars, electric guitars, vocals for sure, keyboards, you clean up that bottom on those things, and all of a sudden the bass really shines and has its own room. But then there are the things that are playing down there, which is usually the kick and the bass drum. The bass and the kick drum. And then it's a matter of trying to find, for me, kick drum's not too hard, but the bass instrument can be a tough one sometimes, where there's usually, very often, there's notes that poke out, just either in the instrument itself, especially if it's an upright bass, where there's acoustic things that make one note jump out more, or there's holes where there are important notes in the song, So trying to think of it musically in terms of, okay, well, the song's in the key of C, and I really want that when he hits the root here in the bridge or wherever it is, that if it's giving you the emotional push that you want there, it's just a matter of finding that frequency and just getting it to where it's going to hit in the right way. And then on top of that is then looking for the clarity part, which in a dense mix can be a hard thing to do, is to get the bass, especially if there's guitars and lots of other mid-range instruments. Usually the bass, electric bass, somewhere between 1 and 2K is where the majority of the clarity is. Sometimes it's higher. You just go in there and try and find that place where it really speaks in between what everything else is doing. And that's usually, I find that that's one of the kind of last things that I do on a mix. Like, I'm listening for the clarity on the bass to see if I can just find that spot where it's going to poke through more on an iPhone and stuff like that.
Do you ever use like saturation or something like that for achieving that?
Yes, sure. Yeah, because that definitely helps bring out those harmonics, which help it speak on a smaller speaker system. Yeah, for sure. Saturation's
Hmm.
pretty much a standard thing also, yeah.
And how do you do that? Like split the track and have like a parallel thing, or?
Sometimes, not usually. I mean, because most of the time I'll have the DI and an amp track on an electric bass. And so I'll pick one of those, whichever one I feel kind of has um, the most harmonics already, maybe, and or just the one that I find most pleasing in that range. Uh, and most of the time it's the amp, honestly, but
Hmm.
not always. Uh, and I will just do it on just that track. So it's kind of
Uh-huh.
already split for me, you know.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Then the other thing also is very often you get tracks to mix it, and there's two mics on, you know, something, or there's a DI and a bass DI and an amp, and they're not quite in phase. That can really, you know, make your life difficult if you're trying to do this. And so if I'm having troubles, and I'll just go in and look and say, oh, okay, I can see the phase of this is a little bit needs to nudge one way or the other. So you just move it around till it feels like it's nice and solid.
You were talking about like controlling the notes that poke out. How do you do that?
Yeah, sometimes it's with multi-band compression. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I'll use Fab Filter Q3. I use that everywhere all the time. You know, like I'm sure everybody does. It's a great plugin. But for that kind of just finding that frequency, uh, I mean, I've used the Wave C4 forever since it first came
Uh-huh.
out. Still a great multi-band compressor. I try not to go too heavily on that stuff because I find the multi-band thing has kind of gotten out of hand. It's kind of like, you know, where the loudness wars were, and with uh, you know, auto tune and things that you take it to an extreme, and it just kind of can start to destroy things. Um, and of course, this is always dependent on what the style of the music is. There's certain records you want to sound natural and not over processed. And then there's, when you're doing pop records, it's okay to make it sound very processed. And then a lot of the times you want it to sound very processed. So that's number one in choosing my tools as I'm working on any particular song. It's like, what's the style? What's appropriate for this style of music, or what are we really trying to achieve? So, you know, if I want things to sound natural, I'm probably not going to go too overboard with multi-band compression. You know, I was at a show one time, a live show, and it was just a vocal and acoustic guitar performance. And I was sitting right at the sound desk, and I was watching the guy, and I was, first of all, I was bummed because I couldn't understand what the singer was singing,
Mm-hmm.
and I could hear that there was too much multi-band compression going on with the vocal to the point where the S's were getting swallowed, and I couldn't. There was no clarity. It was bright, but it wasn't clear, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then he would sing out in a, you know, he had a great voice, but whenever he sang out, it just got smaller and smaller, and I was just very frustrated. I was like, why is this so difficult? This guy is doing way too much, and the performance is being sacrificed as a result. And you know, I hate to see that, and I certainly hate to do that if I'm doing it inappropriately like that. So, you know, it's with all the powerful tools we have these days, it's very easy to overuse them. So, um, you know, I'm kind of glad that I came up at a time when we were pretty limited still. You know, we still had amazing, powerful tools like an SSL console, which was,
Mm-hmm.
you know, crazy. But, you know, there's so many things we can do now and do them easily. Sometimes I feel like people just do things just to do it.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Have you tried Baby Audio's plugins? They're designed to inspire creativity and enhance your music production experience. From their Crystalline River plugin, offering ultra clean reflex free of metallic artifacts, to Spaced Out, a hybrid reverb and delay workstation that combines over 50 individual effects. Baby Audio provides tools that can transform your sound. Right now, you can get an exclusive discount on all their plugins. Just use the code AGARTHA15 at checkout. Don't miss out. Click the link in the description and elevate your music today.
Okay.
What I usually do is I have the bass and I make a copy. And I leave one track only for the low end. Maybe I have, I don't know, high pass filter, no, low pass filter. I always confuse that. Low pass
Yeah, yeah.
filter, and maybe on, I have it on, I don't know, 300 hertz or something like that.
Right.
And I
Right.
have the other one maybe 250 and high. So
Yeah.
I treat the low end in one track and the highs and the mids on the other one. So my question is,
Yeah.
do you maybe sometimes do something like that?
Yeah. Sometimes, not usually, but I do for sure, and that's a good, it's a good way. Like particularly in something where there's a dense arrangement going on, or it's a pop record. That's something I would probably do. It makes it easier to focus on just the low end of the bass and just the clarity part of it. And then maybe you just add the saturation to the high end part, and so you're not getting fuzzy low end. Yeah, and I think that's a pretty common practice these days. Um, yeah, I do it sometimes, but
Cool.
not. It's not like a regular thing. For the most part, I always look at it like the first thing I want to do is just get a good balance, with what's there. Unless it's really badly recorded, and I have to start doing a lot of stuff to kind of make it work. But I'd say I'm pretty fortunate. Most of the time, the recordings I get are really pretty good, and not don't require extremes in order to get a good balance just immediately and get a good feel for the song right away.
And do you approach the low end differently depending on the genre?
Yeah, yeah, for sure. And I'll think of it just generally different, not necessarily specifics with techniques, but uh, in general, hip hop, pop stuff. Um, I'm gonna There's gonna be more low end in it basically, and guitar driven, uh, or yeah, just say guitar driven music, uh, and where there's big, kind of rock drums. Um, I'm probably gonna have less bass in general because it's just gonna give you more. It, it's always like a relative thing, right? So in a way, the more bass you have, the less mid range and high end you have, right? And so there are certain styles of music that favor one over the other. R&B, which I certainly have done a lot of over my career, there tends to be a smoother mid-range. You don't want things to poke out too much. And there's a lot of beautiful, big low end. And then usually on top is a very sweet, kind of present high end. So mids are pretty soft and gentle, easy, smooth, whatever you want to use as an adjective. Bass big and nice, kind of clear, bright top end. That's just a generalization, but that's kind of where I will look to balance things, right? And then, then with like rock music, it's going to be more mid-range focused. There's going to be more guitars and vocals that are kind of not big and smooth. They might be more compressed so that they kind of stay in the middle, but there's not going to be a lot of low end in the vocals, and oftentimes you're going to knock off a little high end on them so that they just kind of find this spot in the middle where they can just stay.
Mm-hmm.
And you're trying to then balance that against the guitars and the snare drum. So again, that's a generalization, but because I feel like a lot of the personality of the song and kind of just what it makes you feel right off the bat is based on that tonal balance, So if I'm trying to make a rock record that's kind of should get you amped up and excited and feel like, that's going to be mid-range, and I want to make sure that mid-range is the first thing you kind of identify with, as opposed to an R&B song that's supposed to put you in a different kind of mood. And these are very big generalizations, but they tend to work, at least for a starting place,
Yeah,
Yeah.
perfect. When you're mixing for stereo, do you usually use a subwoofer?
I have an Atmos room here. You can maybe
Yeah, I
see
can see that.
some of the
Yeah.
speakers. Yeah, and of course that includes an LFE subwoofer. So that's pretty much always on, but it's not really in just my stereo mixes. And but yeah, it's there, but it's not used all the time. It's really it's just used for when I'm doing Atmos.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And do you like checking the low end on headphones?
Not I wouldn't say the low end is what I check on headphones. Headphones, I'm more looking for imaging, tonal balance to see if there's any noises or things that there are certain things you hear more easily on headphones, like clicks and pops and little noises. And then, of course, like I said, the imaging. I'll kind of look more for mid-range and stuff. The low end, I tend to judge more on speakers.
And which ones are you using now? I mean, I'm talking about headphones.
Headphones?
Mm-hmm.
I've got my Auto-Z LCD
Mm-hmm.
10X, whatever they're called,
LCDX.
which I love. Yeah, LCDX with a special cable. I've had those for a few years. I'm very happy with them. I really like them. When I started doing Atmos, I've never really been a big headphone guy. Like I tend to just check the headphones towards the end for those things that I was just talking about. The end of the fade and these kind of very small detail kind of things. And but when I got into doing Atmos stuff, and so before Atmos, I wasn't very particular about my headphones. I would kind of use anything. I had a couple of favorites, but no $10,000 headphones or anything like that. And but then I started doing Atmos, and of course the headphone experience is a big part of Atmos, and so I found myself listening on headphones a lot more and having to make very critical judgments more on headphones. So I decided, okay, I'm gonna try and look into some really nice headphones that I'm comfortable with, that I can trust, and I ended up with these Auto-Zs.
Do you prefer the low end to come mainly from the center of your mix? Because some mixers even apply maybe, I don't know, high pass filters on the sides.
Yeah, for the most part, yes. I back in the old days, I pretty much always, it was always a synth bass, but I would, for the most part, put Dimension D on a bass. That was a standard R&B thing, and then I would do that in pop records as well. And I sometimes still do that, but not as much for sure. And that would usually be my choice for that kind of thing. The Dimension D, it just works.
Cool.
Yeah.
And how do you make the bass and the kick work together?
It's really just balance, balance and EQ, getting some compression usually on the bass that, like I said, makes it feel controlled, where there's not notes poking out or missing. Sometimes I sidechain, that's a very common thing. I only do that if I really feel like it's a very kick drum oriented song, and where it's maybe like a 4 on the floor kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, and what we do there. I don't have to explain it. Yeah. So, yeah. So, I'll do that sometimes.
Cool. You mentioned that you like recording bass with an amp and the DI. So generally, which one has better low end?
Well, it depends on what you mean by the word better. But for the most part, the DI is gonna probably have more like lower frequencies. It'll capture them more than an amp. But it they what might sound better could be the amp moving the air in the room in a certain way that the mic is capturing it, where it sounds maybe fuller,
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to say which one is better.
Mm-hmm.
And if I were doing the kind of splitting off thing where you're going to use one for the low end and one for the high end, most of the time I would probably end up using the DI for the low stuff and the amp for the mid range. But not always.
Mm-hmm.
I try not to, kind of
Yeah.
think too strictly about these kind of things. I generally just kind of go with the flow. I don't try and think about things too much.
Mm-hmm.
And the techniques I've kind of developed over the years, they keep changing. I keep trying new things. I've always liked not doing the same thing all the time, So I've been fortunate where I've worked in all different kinds of genres of music, and different stuff that require different kind of engineering techniques, mixing techniques, and I learn from all of them. And sometimes you just got to go with what's good for that genre, and then sometimes you have a project where it's ripe for experimentation, and it doesn't really have such a defined genre,
Mm-hmm.
where you could try and come up with something new by blending different things and saying, "Oh, well, this is kind of like one of my." There was an album that I did a long time ago that, at the time, I thought was a great example of that, which was Pink's Misunderstood album,
Mm-hmm.
which I mixed a few songs that Dallas Austin had produced. And Dallas was what you'd call an R&B producer, hip hop R&B, and but they were making a kind of a pop rock record, but with R&B sensibilities, and I just thought that was a very cool combination, especially when it's like a big artist that is. It's very hard sometimes for an artist, if they're known for something,
Mm-hmm.
and there's lots of expectations by the audience and by the label and by the managers and all the structure around them, to do something that's unique and different and questionable as far as what it is, And I thought that was a good example of somebody making something new, and it ended up working really well for her. And that's how you get new stuff, I think we're kind of
Exactly.
at a point in music right now where there's not a lot of people, at least on the big stage. Certainly on an independent level, there's lots of experimentation going on, but on the big stage, I think it's pretty defined as far as what type of an artist you are and that you deliver to that audience,
Hmm.
maybe not as many chances being taken by big artists.
Yeah. And how do you make sure that the low end of your mixes translates well across different playback systems?
I listen on different playback systems.
Hmm.
Yeah. So, but I kind of know what to look for and what to, like I was talking about with the bass. Usually, the last thing I'm looking for is that mid-range frequency gonna pop through on an iPhone, uh,
Hmm.
and it's just a matter of getting used to uh, what works in the real world, what translates. Once you kind of know, you know, I need to find something here that's gonna make it work when I go listen on something else, and then you go listen on something else to make sure it's
Yeah.
there.
Hmm.
But I listen on, I don't do it as much now because my Atmos system, I only have one Atmos
Yeah.
speaker system in here, right? Whereas when I was working in stereo, I used to have 5 or 6 different sets of stereo speakers, and I would constantly check between a bunch of them, and then I'd go to the car and I still do that. I go to the car, I go to the living room, I have a little system on my deck. I'll listen on. I have some great these iLoud
Uh-huh.
speakers
Yeah.
that I really love. They've become very trusted for me in the last year or so that I've had them. But so I just try and listen on a lot of things because it always sounds different on every
Hmm.
set of speakers. It's
Yeah. For
it's
sure.
it's it's pretty impossible to make something that sounds exactly the same on all different kinds of speakers. There's just too much variety out there.
Hmm. And do you think there's a difference in how the low end is handled when mixing in the box?
Versus on a console,
Uh-huh. Yeah.
nah,
No.
no. At this point, I don't think there's much of a difference. At this point, for me at least, I don't feel like there's much of a difference between outside of workflow.
Hmm.
Sonically, I don't
Yeah.
feel like there's much of a difference between working in the box and on a console. And I
Hmm.
way prefer mixing in the box at this point.
Uh-huh. Cool. And when you start a mix, do you use EQ or maybe a tape plugin or something to shape the low end first?
Uh, do I use EQ to shape the low end?
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, the first thing I do is just get a balance, and that way I can see kind of where the trouble spots are. If I need to, because this way I'm not doing too much just for the sake of doing it. So I'm not going to start by EQing things before I get a balance, and so if I get a balance and I get things sitting where I feel like, okay, that's a generally good place, and I haven't really even started to EQ anything yet. Maybe something immediately I'm like, okay, well, that vocal's way too dull, or that guitar is way too dull, or whatever. I'll just generally brighten it up really quick. Or if,
Mm-hmm.
something's just a bad sound, I'll start EQing it early because I don't want to struggle with something that's a bad sound that I can already tell is not going to work. But I'm generally going to start with what's there and then say, oh, okay, this bass doesn't have enough growl in it, and I'm going to start EQing in or using some saturation to get some, growl out of it.
Mm-hmm.
But balance is first.
I always like to ask my guests how do they approach their mix bus. So, what plugins or gear do you use, and what does each element bring to the mix?
Well, my mix bus stuff kind of changes often, also depending on the project and what it kind of calls for. But there are certain things that I use a lot. Uh, these days, I usually have, for rock things, I'll have an SSL compressor, and even in pop things, I'll have an SSL compressor. Sometimes I'll have an API 2500. Um, I'll usually have some kind of harmonics kind of thing where there's a plugin called Harmonics that I really like. This is like a tape saturation plugin. That's usually on there, along with there's a plugin called the Oven that I
Mm-hmm.
like. That is really good, and that's just kind of tonal shaping, but in a very pleasing way. And then there'll be a multi-band compressor in there, but I won't have it on to start with. That's usually I'll pop that in at a point, or I won't at all if I feel like I want it to sound more polished. Usually,
Mm-hmm.
because I find that as soon as you put multi-band compression on things, it tames it all very much, which results in a kind of polished sound. And that can be good sometimes, and it can not be good sometimes.
Mm-hmm. And when you're using the compressor, how much do you compress?
On the mix bus,
Mm-hmm. On the mix bus, yeah.
depends. It's to taste. Sometimes a lot. Sometimes it might be hitting 6-8 dB, and just getting cranked. And then sometimes it's just barely touching it. So,
Mm-hmm.
no,
Yeah, and what?
no real there.
What time of the not time? Sometimes I lose my English. I hate that.
Oh, that's okay. No worries.
What step of the process do you turn on the compressor?
Which the mix bus compressor?
Mix bus compressor, yeah.
Pretty early, if not immediately. Depends. Yeah, most of the time it's on there early,
Mm-hmm.
if not from the very beginning. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard many of your interviews that you're a huge fan of the Beatles.
Yep.
So, what was your experience when you worked with Paul or Ringo for the first time?
Well, I'll tell you, Ringo. So I've been a huge Beatles fan my whole life,
Uh-huh.
and for sure the reason I got into wanting to be a musician and an engineer and producer was because I just listened to Beatles records and
Mm-hmm.
couldn't figure out what was going on, and I spent all my youth, usually with headphones, just listening to these amazing productions. And so in 2002, I was in the in the lobby of a studio, and I just happened to read this magazine called Music Connection that tells you what things are going on in the music industry. And I saw that it said Ringo Starr is making a record with producer Mark Hudson for Koch Records. And I called my manager and I said, hey, Ringo's making a record. I don't know if it's been mixed yet or not, but if it hasn't, I want to mix that record. And, just not expecting anything. And literally like 15 minutes later, he called back. He said, all right, you got a meeting with Mark Hudson on Tuesday at wherever. And so I went and met Mark, and Mark is, if you can believe, a bigger Beatles fanatic than I am.
Uh-huh.
And so we kind of hit it off immediately just because of that, but also he's a great guy. He's super funny. And anyway, so 2 weeks later, I was flying to London to work with Ringo on an album called Ringo Rama, and I was staying at his house.
Oh.
It was, and we just got to hang out for a month, basically.
Uh-huh.
And it was the most amazing experience of certainly my career, if not my life. It was really, really something.
Uh-huh.
And then I did another record with him here at my place, where just mixing. And I've done a couple of other things with him since then. I did some Atmos mixes of his last record, or it was almost his last record, an EP that Linda Perry produced last year. And he was involved in the Echo in the Canyon and some other stuff. But anyway, just the most amazing experience. He's the sweetest, greatest drummer, greatest everything. He's the greatest.
Uh-huh. Cool.
Paul, I did some work with, but I didn't get to meet Paul. I only
Oh,
actually finally got to meet Paul last year
oh.
at a rehearsal, and I
Uh-huh.
basically just got to say hi and thank you, and that was it. But I did get to mix a couple of singles for him, but he wasn't there. Yeah, but
Uh,
man, that's like I talk about pinch me moments. Both of those were really like I can't believe I'm
uh-huh.
here.
Yeah.
Really.
Whoa.
Yep. Yeah.
Cool. And continuing with the memories, what memories come to mind when you think about working with Michael Jackson?
Oh, well, that was another one too, where it's like, wow, how did I get here? Because when I was working with Michael, it was, pretty much at his most famous, I would say. It was like,
Oh.
early 90s, and he was for sure the most famous person in the world. And he was great. We were working on an album called Dangerous, and it brought me out to LA. This is 91. And he was awesome and simply the greatest singer I've ever recorded for sure. And he was a perfectionist and very competitive in a way that he really just wanted to like a number one album. He just wanted it to be the biggest, most eventful album of all time at that time, and I think that was kind of probably true of everything he did. He just wanted it to be the absolute best it could be,
Hmm.
and he would stop at nothing to get it.
Do you have a favorite moment working with him?
Yeah, I've told this story before, but there was one time. It was the first time I recorded his vocals, and we had the idea for the chorus for a song called "Remember the Time." We had the groove and the beat and kind of the song structure, and we had recorded it, but didn't know exactly what the hook was going to be. And Michael had said, "Okay, I'm ready to sing the hook on that one." And back in those days, in R&B music at least, it was very common to record the vocals just once in the chorus
Hmm.
and then fly them in. Now we cut and paste them in with Pro Tools, but back then you had to offset tape machines or put them in a sampler and trigger it with a MIDI and all this stuff. But that was the normal way of doing things, and that was the way we always did it with Teddy Riley, who was the producer. And so I said, Michael, you want me to just go to the first chorus? And then he said, no, play it from the top. So I played it from the top, and we got through the first chorus, and he sang the first note, and I pressed stop, and he said, why'd you stop? I said, well, we're just getting the choruses. We don't need to go any further. We'll fly him in to the rest. And he looked at me like, what are you talking about? And then I, just went back to the top again, and he sang it all the way down to the end of the song. And then he did a double the same way, and then another note with maybe a double and a triple. I don't remember. But we did 9, 12 tracks of chorus vocals, each one being a little bit different, but each one being super tight. Like all of his breaths were totally aligned, and his timing was great. His pitch was perfect. And we were done in like 20 minutes.
Wow.
Whereas if we had done it the other way, it would have taken me an hour or whatever to fly all the offsets and find the offsets on the synchronizers and all this
Hmm.
stuff we used to have to do. And I thought to myself, man, this is so much quicker to just do it this way. Why don't we do it all the time like this? And then I remember that's because you're not recording Michael Jackson all the time. So,
Yeah. Do you remember how did Michael prepare before singing?
well, he would very often, we'd be waiting to, we'd have every day we'd have kind of a to-do list of what was going to kind of get done that day. And after a while, we got to the point where the only thing that was on the to-do list for the most part was for Michael to sing, because he would put it off and put it off. And I came to realize that he was really just putting it off, even though, we knew what the lyrics were, we knew what the song was. Maybe we had the chorus vocals already, but he hadn't done the lead vocal. It was because he was really waiting till he was absolutely ready. Like he knew it, he knew what he was going to do, and then when he would come in, he would just focus and just sing it a million times, and then comp it. But he was an amazing singer, amazing singer.
Hmm. Yeah, I always wondered how loud did he sing? Did he sing?
How long did he
Loud? No,
sing?
loud, loud,
How
loud.
loud? He
Yeah.
sang loud. He had very. He would scream.
Uh huh.
He would scream. Yeah. And he would also. The other thing was he would always be. His foot would be keeping time, and one of the first things he said, he's like, "Don't erase any of that stuff. Don't erase the breaths. Don't erase the stomping." Because I'm guessing maybe because at some point somebody had erased some of that stuff, thinking, well, we don't want that.
Hmm.
And he very intentionally was putting that stuff in. It was part of the groove. So, yeah,
Hmm. And do you remember the vocal chain you used for that album?
not really, but I'm pretty sure we used the Neve console mic pre, different mics. Later on, Bruce Swedien came in and he recorded a lot of the vocals.
Hmm.
And I remember Bruce's chain was a 1073, I believe, an 1176, and then mics would change, but it was often either a C12 or a 47, and then an SM7 was a very common one. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah. Now I have a couple of questions from our audience. So the first one
Okay.
is, you've recorded vocals for all kinds of, for all kinds and styles. What do you find to be the most challenging aspect of recording vocals?
The most challenging aspect of recording vocals usually is getting the singer to feel comfortable and relaxed and safe to where they can give a great performance.
Hmm.
The microphone, the signal chain, all that stuff is secondary to just getting what I was just talking about
Hmm.
Michael waiting till he knows that he's ready, right? You want the singer to feel like they are ready. And sometimes, very often, that means kind of duping them into thinking this is just a scratch. This isn't the real vocal. Just get out and sing so we know where we are in the song. And then because of that lets go of all their apprehensions and anxiety about how do I sing this line? How am I going to do this? Oh, so and so's here. I got whatever. If they just feel like it's a throwaway
Hmm.
and they are ready to sing it, but they don't even know it, you can get a really great performance. And it doesn't matter what mic it's on. I mean, you want something that's going to sound decent, but I find an SM7 is a great mic for exactly that reason.
So here's another question. What is the most common mistake you see when people are mixing bass?
Thinking that it's all about the low frequencies when it's not. The low frequencies are a big part of it, but kind of the secret to getting a good bass sound, I think, is more about finding that mid-range frequency that's going to help it speak. Thinking that, you want a lot of bass in your bass.
Sure.
That's a mistake. Yeah.
Hmm. How do you build confidence in the singer when recording?
Well, I was just talking about that. Yeah. Sometimes it's letting them not don't let them get inside their head too much, and keep a relaxed atmosphere in the studio and a fun atmosphere. I'm a big believer that it's that energy that translates when they go out there, and then ultimately what comes through the speaker for the listener is that energy that they have in that moment when they're singing.
What do you think about the future of mixing in Atmos?
The future of mixing in Atmos or and Atmos, because the future of mixing, that's a separate conversation, and then there's Atmos.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I'll answer it that way. I'm a big believer in Atmos. I think I I think it's here to stay. I think we're only going to get deeper and more advanced
Mm-hmm.
with the immersive format, whatever, whether it's, you call it Atmos or if it's something else. But I think, immersive experiences are going to be everywhere. I think, and I don't know how long it will take, but that is definitely the future
Mm-hmm.
of simulating environments. And that obviously includes audio in that simulation. But I think, we're going to be living in these very virtual worlds pretty soon. If I had to pick a timeline, I don't know, I would say maybe 10 years. We're already here in a lot of ways. And I think like the idea of like the Sphere in Las Vegas,
Yeah.
I think that those kind of like that'll be the equivalent of a movie theater down in your main street. You'll have a kind of sphere type of event space where crowds can gather to experience something together in an immersive environment. And whether or not that involves a band on stage or it's a film that's made for this, it's all going to start to combine movies and music and performances, and we'll have historical events. Like you'll be able to go down to Main Street and see the Beatles at Shea Stadium,
Oh, I would love that.
1964. Well, I guarantee you that's going to be one of the first things that I want to see. Washington D.C. show that came after Ed Sullivan. But anyway,
Uh-huh. Cool.
these are this is the future. I don't and I think it's closer than we think.
Mm-hmm.
And the mixing, there's so much AI technology advancing so quickly right now, and that's here. I think there are certain things that AI will be able to do for us as mixers. I'm not sure it will totally replace what a mixer does. I don't know. It's a very it's a it's an amazing time now where you look at what AI is able to do. I kind of don't understand how it can do it and do it so quickly.
Uh-huh.
It's just mind. But I know with like most technologies, when they first come out, they just seem unbelievable because our brains can't kind of understand yet what's
Mm-hmm.
going on. But the more we're exposed to the technology, the more we're able to figure out, oh, it's because of this, or we see these telltale signs. We start to hear or see things that clue us in that this is we're being manipulated in some way or something, right? And so once we kind of get the trick, the shine is off, and I have to wonder if just with all this AI technology that we just get more and more attuned to what that is, and we start to embrace the more human side of things as a counter to that. And so maybe the future of music is everybody singing out of tune and out of time and singing really bad songs,
I
or
hope not.
or singing really good songs really well, and
Uh-huh.
but still in a very human way that AI just can't keep up with. I don't
Uh-huh.
know. Interesting though.
Mm-hmm. And since you have a bigger canvas, is it for you? Is it harder or easier mixing for Atmos?
Yeah, sometimes it's a little harder actually because you have so much room to play.
Mm-hmm.
It can be easier in that way because if you have a very dense song, you now have room for all these things where you can actually clearly hear them. They're not being masked by all these other instruments. So for a dense thing, it makes things easier. For something that's not so dense and more simple, it can actually be harder because you have so much choice as to where you can put things.
Mm-hmm.
You spend more time deciding, do I want to pan that here? Do I want to pan that here? Or, little differences. But for the most part, I find it makes it easier because I'm kind of more inspired. When I start off, the way I mix these days is when I'm mixing, I mix in Atmos and stereo simultaneously. So I start in Atmos and kind of get myself to where I feel like the room is happening, where it's being filled the way I want, and the song is developing through the whole room, through the space, and then once I've kind of got things placed where I want, then I just start concentrating on the stereo version of it, and I listen in stereo and make adjustments, things that usually there's just balance adjustments that need to happen or some EQ things, and then maybe some panning things that don't translate as well into stereo. So I'll figure out some other compromise or something like that. But that's the way I mix these days.
Mm-hmm.
And
Cool.
I get excited. Like I'm kind of more excited when I start a mix these days, I think, because I'm starting in Atmos and it's like just a bigger sandbox to play in.
Cool. When you're sent tracks that aren't well recorded and you feel they're lacking low end, what do you do?
If they're lacking low end, I'm sure I'm going to be adding some low end. And most of the time, that's just going to be with EQ. There's sometimes when I'll use, max bass or some of the, the subharmonic generators. I generally, if I use those, only use a little bit. I generally don't like too much low end. You know what I mean? I feel like it just kind of becomes distracting and overused. And it's not only in records. Like I go to shows and it's just nothing but boom, 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 and I can't understand. I cannot understand or feel anything else that's going on other than this booming sensation. So I just find concentrating on low end too much to be almost a distraction. Yeah.
Great.
But I'm a bass player and I love low end. So
Cool.
but it's always it's secondary to me. I don't know. I mean, I guess the thing about low end is it usually in dance music and certain kinds of music where it's meant to help you, to make you move. It's very important, right? So and it's really for me, it's about how does the bass fill up the room, right? So like when you were asking about do I check low end in the headphones, it's like I don't, because in a way I almost feel like low end is really meant to be experienced in a room, because the way bass frequencies travel is different than the way high frequencies travel. And so like very often when I'm listening for the low end, I'll play it in here and then I go into the live room here at the studio and I listen from out there. And I'm just listening to how is the bass filling up the room I'm listening from the other room, and is it getting in the way of the vocal, and is it is it consistent, or is it, if it needs to develop, is it developing emotionally the way I want it to? So I generally think of low end as a speaker acoustic.
Dave, thank you so much for being part of the podcast today. I had a lot of fun.
Thank you. I appreciate you having me here, and I hope the discussion is informative or helpful
Yeah.
or enjoyable to your
Hmm.
audience.
It was great. So thank you.
Great.